Alright, moving on to the next solutions. These are solutions for the coordinates and transformations. And the focus of this is just to change the coordinates on these points because we were struggling with that a little bit in class. And so I got a whole assignment on just changing the coordinates. And so you got a list of coordinates here. Use the function to change them. And so I'm going to take my A prime coordinates, my A coordinates, and use the function to get my A prime coordinates. Okay, A is currently at 1, 2. My function tells me to just switch the order. And so if I switch the order, A prime is going to be at 2, 1. B is currently at negative 2, 1. My function tells me to switch the order because xy goes to yx. And so I'm going to put 1, negative 2. And then C prime is currently at 0, 4. I need to switch my order to get 4, 0. And that's my that's my new order, and those are my new points. Moving on to 2. This function says I need to switch the sign on both of those coordinates. And so if I take my old h, that the coordinates are 4, 0, I need to change the sign on both. And so I'm going to get 4, 0, because negative 0 isn't a thing, it's just 0 still. And so that's why it's negative 4, 0. K prime comes from K. K is 6, negative 7. I need to change the sign on both. So I'm going to get negative 6 and positive 7. On L, used to have negative 3, 3. Changing the sign on both, you'll get 3, negative 3. And those are my coordinates. Moving on to 3. This function tells me to switch the order and change the sign on the first one after you've switched them. So M used to be at negative 4, negative 6. So I'm going to get negative 6, negative 6, negative 4. But I need to change the sign on the first one. So we got positive 6, negative 4. N prime comes from N. N is at negative 2, 5. Switch the order. And I need to switch the sign on the first coordinate. So I get negative 5, 2, negative 2. P prime comes from P. P is 9, negative 3. Switch the order. That's a hideous 9. And change the sign on the first one, so it's now positive 3, 9. Moving on to 4. This function tells me not to really do much except change the sign on the y-coordinate. And so the order of the number stays the same, just the sign on the second number. And so A prime comes from A, which is at negative 1, negative 2. The x stays the same, but the y-coordinate changes the sign. B comes from B prime comes from B, which is at 2, negative 1. X stays the same. The sign on y changes sign. And the sign on the y changes to the opposite. C prime comes from C, which is 0, negative 4. I need to change the sign on both. I mean, not on both, on the y. It used to be negative 4, now it's positive 4, and that's those. Moving on to 5. This function here tells me to add 4 to the x and subtract 5 from the y. And so, if you want me to really write it all out, the x used to be negative 5. Now I need to add 4. The y used to be negative 3. Now I need to subtract 5. And so that's going to give me coordinates of negative 1, negative 8. E prime comes from E. X used to be negative 2. We need to add 4 to that. The y used to be 7. We need to subtract 5 from that. That's going to give you 2 for the x value, the x coordinate, and 2 for the y coordinate, and E prime is that. F prime is going to come from F. The x coordinate is 11. We need to add 4 to that. The y coordinate is negative 2. We need to subtract 5 from that. And so F prime is going to be at 15, negative 7. And those are those coordinates. Moving on to 6. This function says to switch the order and change the sign on the second coordinate. And so R prime comes from R. R is at 7, negative 8. I need to change that order. And I need to switch the sign on the second one. So I'm going to get negative 8, negative 7 for R prime. S prime is going to come from S, which used to be negative 1, 1, switch the order, and I need to switch the sign on the second one. So I got 1, 1 now. T prime comes from T, which is at 4, 4. If you switch the order, you still get 4, 4. But you have to switch the sign on this. You're going to get negative 4 on that second coordinate. Moving on to 7. This function tells me to switch the order and switch the signs. And so F prime is going to come from F. It used to be at negative 6, negative 6. So if I switch it, I still get negative 6, negative 6. But I need to change the sign on both of them. So I'm going to get positive 6, positive 6. This positive looks hideous. Alright, moving on to G. G prime comes from G, which is at 2, negative 7. I need to switch the order. And I need to switch the signs on both of them. So G prime's at 7, negative 2. H prime comes from H, which is at 3, 9. I need to switch the order. And I need to switch the sign on both of them. So there's my H prime. Moving on to 8. This function tells me to subtract 3 from the x and then add 4 to the y value. And so n prime comes from n. Let me write a little bit smaller here. The x value is starting out as negative 1. I need to subtract 3 from that, just like it says. Y is currently at negative 3. I need to add 4 to that, like the directions say. And so n prime is going to be at negative 4, 1. D prime comes from D, which currently is x at 2, so I need to subtract 3 from that. And the y coordinate is negative 4. We need to add 4 to that. So when you do that, you'll get D prime is at negative 1, because 2 minus 3 is negative 1. And then negative 4 plus 4 is 0. So D prime is at negative 1, 0. R prime, the x coordinate used to be negative 7. We need to subtract 3 from that. And the y coordinate used to be 0. We need to add 4 to that. And that's going to give us our coordinates for R prime, which is negative 10, 4. And there's those ones. Moving on to 9. This function tells us to switch the order and switch the sign on the first one. We did this one. Same type of function before on an earlier problem. Z used to be at 10, negative 7. If you switch the order, you'll get negative 7, 10. And I need to switch the sign on the first one. V prime comes from V, which is at negative 8, 2. Switch the order to get to negative 8. And switch the sign on the first one, just like it says there. And J prime comes from J, which is at 6, 4. Switch the order and switch the sign on the first one, just like the directions say. And so we got negative 4, 6 for J. And moving on to 10, which is the last one. Our function tells us to subtract 2 from x and subtract 3 from y. So A prime comes from A. X used to be 7. We need to subtract 2. Y used to be negative 2. We need to subtract 3 now to get our new A prime coordinates. 7 minus 2 is 5. Negative 2 minus 3 is negative 5. So there's A prime. B prime comes from B. The x coordinate is 5. We need to subtract 2 from that. And the y coordinate used to be 1. We need to subtract 3 from that, just like the directions say. And so B prime is going to be at 3, negative 2. C prime started out at 0. We need to subtract 2 from that. And the y was at 0. And we need to subtract 3 from that. And so our C prime is going to be negative 2, negative 3. And those are all the problems all the way done.